welcome back. For those of you who are reading along, we are looking at Chapter 7 from Stephanie Pearl-McPhee's book, Knitting Rules. I downloaded this book from Hoopla from my library, and I have permission from Story Publishing to read this to you out loud online. Chapter 7, Scarves and Shawls. I'm a statistical anomaly in the knitting world. I'm one of only an apparent handful of knitters who didn't learn to knit by cutting their stitching teeth on a scarf. It was a potholder. I was 4. I didn't have what it takes to get through a scarf. Perhaps my grandmother intended for me to knit a scarf, but then she realized my attention span was that of a tsetse fly and figured out a way for me to bail. Or maybe my disdain for scarves as a teaching tool is genetic. For whatever reason, it was years and years before I knit one. And I'm still not convinced that scarves are for beginners. Scarf basics. Scarves are a decent commitment if I don't understand why we refer to beginning knitting as being in the scarf stage, as though they're larval knitters, not yet fully aware or awake. I don't know if anyone has noticed yet, but a lot of these scarf stage knitters are turning out square yardage that would awe a seasoned knitter, and are becoming extraordinarily adept in the process. In addition, many of these knitters are using yarns that are darn tricky. These fun fur, fancy pants, novelty yarns are harder to work with than you think. And though you could conceivably knit a quick and easy scarf using fuzzy skeins, even an experienced knitter has to admit that it's difficult to knit a freaking scarf if you can't find it on the needle. I know knitters who've been beaten by the sheer volume and monotony of a scarf, or been reduced to gibbering idiots by a lace pattern so complex that signing up for a dental experiment at the local veterinary school would seem like a better hobby. Alright, I love the top 10 lists. 10 reasons to knit a scarf. Number 1, everybody needs one. If you live in a warm place, a scarf is an accessory. If you live in a cold place, like Canada, it's a necessity. All that stands between you and certain death. Okay, not certain death, frostbite maybe, chilliness for sure. 2, a friend of mine likes to say that a winter scarf is caulking. Wound round and round your neck, it bridges the difficult gap a coat leaves at the top and keeps all your heat from escaping. 3, no matter how many coats you own, by the time January rolls around, you'll be sick to death of all of them. Owning 20 scarves adds a little more color to the endless winter and lets you pretend that you have a different look. Number 4, you can skip the gauge swatch with a scarf and have it not matter at all. How could a scarf not fit? Actually, don't answer that. I'm sure we'll find out. Number 5, scarves are varied in technical difficulty. You can do one in plain garter stitch, or make a delicate lace wonder. You could knit nothing but scarves your whole knitting career, never repeat yourself, and learn almost every knitting technique. 6, scarves are easy, at least mostly easy. If you're a beginning knitter, you can get a fabulous yarn and let it do all the work. 7, just as there's comfort food, there's comfort knitting. And a nice plain scarf out of simple, delicious wool, knit back and forth in naive, mindless rows, is good for those days when anything more complex would make you cry. 8, a scarf is always a welcome gift. Even if the recipient lives in Hawaii, a scarf made of a wee slip of silk will be greatly received. 9. If, say, you were going to rob a bank, not that you would, that would be wrong, a scarf could be a vital part of your disguise. 10. The scarf is the gateway to the shawl. There are only so many scarves you can knit before you feel the urge in the shawl direction. Whatever it is, scarves are not the simple rectangles we think of when we remember our early knitting days. They are instead a medium for knitters to play in that they have virtually no limits. That was intended to be inspirational. Now go knit a scarf. How creative can you be? Imagine a scarf as an unlimited canvas. Do you imagine a 12-foot garter stitch behemoth that any Inuit would envy? Do it. How about a wee bit of lace, just big enough to peek out of the top of a woolen coat? There's no reason not to invent, play, or try anything you can see in your mind's eye. It's not like you're going to have to figure out how your plan affects the scarf's armholes. If you can knit it, you can wear it. Admittedly, and there's no point in pretending this isn't true, there are regrettable scarves. Still, much less chance that a fitting error or misunderstanding of the human form will stand in the way of your brilliance. The scarf is an ultimate tool for knitterly self-expression. With a minimum skill and understanding, you can make something that, for better or worse, will be unique. Go forth and knit. I feel quite bad now. Having said in an earlier chapter that a hat is a much better project for beginners, that I'm going to sing the praises of a scarf as a project for a novice knitter. Not a very beginning knitter, because I think that a scarf just goes on too long for someone who struggles for every stitch and really needs the satisfaction of something finished to feel like a knitter. But for someone trying to learn something, a scarf can provide undeniable glory. Scarves are a great way to learn something new. You can try any technique on a scarf and be able to focus on the new element that you're learning. New to cables? A cabled scarf frees you up on the worries of gauge, of incorporating sleeve increases into the pattern, or in my case, the obsessive urge to mirror cables properly on the right and left side of the sweater front. Okay, now she has a number of patterns for different scarves. I'm going to go ahead and skip over reading those out loud. You guys can take a look at those yourselves. Let's pick up at the end of the scarf pattern. A variation inspired by necessity. Recently, I spent an obscene amount of money on a single perfect, exquisite skein of hand-dyed silk. No, I'm not sorry. And yes, it was very beautiful. I didn't want to waste a single yard. It was expensive enough that you'll be able to calculate the dollar value of the wasted yarn and never stop talking about it. The pattern suggested, well, it didn't really suggest, it directed, but I believe that patterns are just guidelines, that you knit 3 inches of a lacy pattern, then 36 inches of seed stitch, then repeat the lacy bit. I wasn't thrilled with the plan. To my way of reckoning, 36 inches might leave leftovers, and there was no way I was having leftovers. It would be like not staying for dessert on a date with Johnny Depp. I thought about lengthening the scarf, but how was I going to know by how much? I couldn't just knit until I ran out of yarn because of the 3 inches of lace on the end. And I didn't want to employ my usual method of grafting in the middle because I didn't see where the middle of the skein was, and because it made me a little delirious to graft seed stitch. Note, I didn't say I can't graft seed stitch. I'm only knitting. I can do anything. I just choose not to. That's all. The same way I choose not to lie in the middle of the freeway or file my teeth into points. I was determined to extract every joyous bit out of the skein, but it took me forever to figure out what to do. I modified the idea from the middle ground scarf and knit the lace end, tucked it away for later, then knit the other lace end and the entire middle of the scarf until I had only about a foot of yarn left. I grafted the pre-knit end onto my ready-knit scarf and danced around the living room singing ABBA songs, eating chocolate, and trying to make the cat admire the meager 2 inches of silk left on the table. It was a good day. Grafting is one of the most brilliant things you can learn how to do in knitting. First attempts normally result in a nervous twitch, but reports on its difficulty are exaggerated. Clever knitters will realize that to graft complex stitches, like cables, you don't need to know anything more. Graft your knit stitches together, and when you come to purl ones, take the yarn to the back, turn the work around, and bingo, more knit stitches. Remember, each stitch is a knit and a purl, and you need to know how to graft only one of them. Okay, now we've got 5 ways to add interest to a boring scarf you already knit. Boring scarf solution number 1, fringe. The jury is out on whether fringe is cool, but I like it, and so do cowboys. To add fringe, cut pieces of yarn twice as long as you would like the fringe to be, fold them in half, and with a crochet hook, pull the looped ends through the edge stitch. Then pull the free ends through and yank on them to make a tight knot. Double points if you tie the fringes into interesting patterns. Boring scarf solution number 2. If you're a knitter who dabbles in crochet, or a crocheter who is dabbling in knitting, take advantage of your position as a multi-crafter and think about adding a few rows of some interesting crochet edging to the bottom of the thing. There's no reason not to combine your skills. Boring scarf solution 3. Knit a bunch of tiny squares, circles, or flowers. Make 30 pom-poms. In short, create anything you like and sew them to, or dangle them from, the ends or edges of the scarf. Boring scarf solution 4. Knit a lace edging and sew it onto the ends. Boring scarf solution number 5. Visit the notions section of a local sewing store and see what it has. Think about big buttons, a bunch of tiny ones, braids, cords, appliques, and tassels. Stand there in front of the wall and ask yourself, could I sew this onto a scarf? Don't limit your thinking. A scarf that turns out too big is not a failure. It's a shawl. Shawls. This is my favorite thing about shawls among the countless great things about them. Shawls are the mighty chameleon of knitting, and virtually anything you knit could be a shawl if you think about it right, and can get the thing over your shoulders. Shawls come in many shapes, sizes, weights, and applications, and keeping an open mind will have you knitting one, perhaps by accident. Shawls suffer, sadly and inappropriately, from an association with pioneer grandmothers, and this can cause many a fine young knitter to turn her back on them. If you are that kind of knitter, the kind who hears shawl and imagines either an 80-year-old woman in a rocking chair or a peasant woman sweeping a dirt floor, maybe it's not that you don't want to knit a shawl, maybe you just need to call it something else. It's not a shawl, it's a stole. A stole is usually a rectangular piece of fabric wider than a scarf, but long enough to wrap around your shoulders, and then fasten fetchingly with a pin or brooch. Using the guidelines for the scarf recipe will make a stole if you do it with more enthusiasm and a certain flair, as the whole idea of a stole embodies elegance. All right, another top 10 list. 10 reasons to knit a shawl. Number 1. Virtually every culture on earth has a history for the shawl. There's a Jewish prayer shawl or tallis, a Spanish lace mantilla or abrigo, a Gaelic tonag, and going back as far as ancient Egypt, the sacred Eros shawl. I have to look that one up and pronounce it correctly. There must be a reason for this, and you should knit one while we figure it out. 2. It's extremely difficult to pretend to be Matahari without one. 3. Shawls can be knit from virtually any yarn you can get and will still look appropriate. I have an Aran Rate cable wrap, a cobweb lace triangle, and a copper and gold stole that I imagine myself visiting casinos in. I don't go in casinos, but the point is that if I were to, this would be the right yarn to go with. 4. There is no more elegant way to cover your shoulders as you and a handsome companion stroll through the moonlight park, chatting after the ballet. Well, yes, I do have a rich fantasy life. Why do you ask? 5. Even if you don't wear one for leaving the house, you can drape one over the back of a chair to pull over your shoulders on a drafty afternoon without anyone thinking you're a slob who doesn't put her clothes away. Which is totally what people say when you leave your sweater on the couch. 6. I can toss a big woolen one around myself as I head to the grocery store and get a Wuthering Heights Kathy on the Moors feel going instead of my usual I forgot to buy cat food feeling. 7. As with scarves, gauge is almost irrelevant. A shawl that comes out too small is a scarf. Or in the event of a too small circular shawl, a doily. And a scarf that comes out too big can be an afghan. Number 8. There is no greater welcome for a new baby than a shawl as delicate as it is. I love the look of a tiny wee face wrapped in exquisite lace stitches. Even the simplest of shawls looks better around a baby. And I labor under the delusion that she will keep the shawl all her life. Perhaps wear it on her wedding day. Or if it's a boy baby, give it to his bride. I even imagine that I've created an heirloom that will someday hold this baby's baby. It's hard to think of anything more worthy of baby puke. Number 9. A shawl has no armholes, heels, sleeves, or seams. 10. The most complex and beautiful lace in the world is Shetland or Orenburg, and knitting a shawl in either tradition will change your idea of what you are capable of on this earth. Okay, I'm going to skip over to the final paragraph of the chapter. This is a final word on shawls. There are several easy patterns for shawls in this book. I'll let you guys take a look at those. A final word on shawls. Recently, I was with a whack of knitters and was asked by someone what I would knit if I could only knit one more thing before I had to quit forever. I answered in a heartbeat. Well, I answered in a heartbeat once the dizziness and nausea from contemplating a life without knitting passed. I'd knit a wedding ring shawl. One of the gossamer, cobwebby lace beauties knit so fine that the entire shawl, the whole thing, millions of stitches and thousands of yards of yarn, can be drawn through a golden wedding ring. They leave me breathless, and in my mind, they are knitting the Holy Grail. My reasoning was simple. It would take forever to knit, and if I only get to knit one more thing in this lifetime, I'm sure not going to knit a hat. It would be over too quickly. I'd have the shawl forever when it was finished. I couldn't outgrow it. nor would it pass out of fashion. Additionally, there is no such thing as a wedding ring shawl too big, so I could drag it out as long as I wanted to. To ice the cake, I'd get to enjoy the magic of blocking a shawl one last time, and enjoy the magic way the pile of ratty-looking yarn, reminiscent of barely wrangled noodles, is transformed by a dunk in water and the process of stretching and pinning it out. The moment a shawl is blocked is still a remarkable one for me, even though I've done it a bunch of times. I think that to go out of knitting on such a magnificently transformative high would be the knitter's equivalent of the way Vikings used to say farewell to a warrior, by sending a burning barge carrying his earthly body off to sea. I realize that this may be a symptom of a deep obsession with shawls, and I'm okay with that. Thanks for listening. I hope you guys are getting along great with your knitting projects. We'll be picking up with another chapter next time. If you have any questions, read the book on Hoopla. Again, you can find Knitting Rules by Stephanie Pearl-McPhee on Hoopla, which is available through the library. And I have talked to the folks at Story Publishing who have given me their permission to read this out loud to you. So please enjoy. Thank you.